Listen close, folks, and let your imagination wander back to the days of dusty streets, cracked leather saddles, and the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer. In the frontier town of Dry Gulch, a humble blacksmith named Gus Clancy was about to discover a secret hidden in the back of a battered old wagon, an act of fate that would change not just his life, but the destiny of everyone around him. When a mysterious young girl emerged, frightened and alone, Gus had no idea her father was a notorious figure known to men like Wyatt Earp himself. And once that father arrived, the entire town turned upside down. Gus Clancy awoke just as the first slivers of dawn light crawled into his cramped upstairs bedroom. He was a tall man in his mid-40s, shoulders stooped from long hours at the anvil, but arms strong enough to shoe every horse in the territory by himself if need be. Gus had lived in Dry Gulch, a small frontier town, perched near the desert's edge, for the better part of 20 years. He was no gunslinger, no fortune hunter, just an honest blacksmith who had come west to escape the suffocation of city life back east. The morning began like any other. He stoked the furnace flames inside his modest blacksmith shop, the clang of metal shaping metal echoing up and down the dusty main road. Folks trickled by to drop off requests or simply wave a greeting. Sheriff Clyde Hastings, a man nearing retirement who sported a worn star on his vest, meandered past to make sure all was well. Clyde's slow, easy nod was enough to tell Gus it would be a typical day, uneventful, but comfortable. Gus was heating an iron rod to craft a new gate hinge when he noticed an unfamiliar wagon roll into town. The wagon was worn, the wood chipped, and the wheels squeaking like an old hinge. No one guided it except a tired old mare tied to the front, slowly plodding along. Stranger still, it stopped right outside his shop, without anyone at the reins. Gus quirked a brow as he set down his hammer. He walked around to the wagon, noticing that its front seat was empty. The mare snorted, as if exasperated from the journey. Gus carefully peered into the back of the wagon, expecting to find a trunk of supplies or maybe a bedroll. Instead, he caught sight of a flash of movement. Something small. Could be a doll or a cat, he thought. But then he heard a tiny whimper. Someone was hiding back there. Stepping closer, Gus gently pulled back the worn tarp. His heart gave a leap. Crouched beneath a moth-eaten blanket was a girl no more than 13 or 14, with tangled hair the color of autumn wheat. Her wide, frightened eyes locked with his, and he froze. She looked half-starved and desperately afraid. "Don't be scared," Gus said softly. He raised his hands, palms out in a calming gesture. "I'm not gonna hurt you." She said nothing, only stared as though he were some monstrous creature she couldn't comprehend. Gus spoke gently, introducing himself, still with no reply. The girl glanced around, making sure no one else was near. Eventually she whispered something, but her voice was so soft that Gus leaned in. "What was that, miss?" "Where is he?" she asked. Fear laced each syllable. "Who, child?" She swallowed hard. "My father. He left me. Don't let him find me." Gus felt his gut tighten. In frontier towns, tragedies were endless. But a lone child turning up in a battered wagon was more unusual than a two-headed calf. He offered her his hand. Hesitating, she took it, and he helped her climb out. Beneath the covering, there was only an empty satchel and a single blanket. The wagon looked like it had been lived in for weeks. "Let's get you some proper food," Gus murmured. Then, mindful not to spook her, he led her slowly toward the back of his shop, where he had a small break area, little more than a table, a cast-iron stove, and some shelves of supplies. He offered her water and the stale bread he'd meant to have for lunch. She devoured it in seconds. "My name's Gus," he said after she ate. "What's yours?" Her dusty cheeks turned pink. I'm Sarah," she said, finally giving him a small measure of trust. Sarah Mulligan. The name meant nothing to Gus at first, but that changed soon enough. Over the next few hours, Gus managed to glean fragments of Sarah's story. She had come from somewhere far east, traveling with her father, Jeremiah Mulligan. They'd been on the road for months, sleeping in the wagon, or in the rough, occasionally renting a room in a cheap lodging house. Her mother had died years ago. Jeremiah Mulligan had decided to drag his daughter out west in pursuit of something. Sarah didn't know what. He spoke in hushed tones, mentioned gold or silver, bragged about some hidden claim. But mostly, he stayed silent. All she knew was that last night, as they were nearing Dry Gulch, they got in an argument. Sarah had refused to keep traveling without enough food or water. For weeks, she felt he was becoming unhinged, talking to himself, jumping at shadows. Right around midnight, she woke to find her father was gone. The wagon along with her was still there. She had no clue where he had disappeared, but something in her voice told Gus there was more to it. She feared him truly, and that fear was strong enough that she hid all morning in the wagon, not daring to reveal herself until Gus found her. Concerned, Gus turned to the only authority he trusted, Sheriff Hastings. But Sarah begged him not to. "He can't know where I am," she whispered. "Please, Gus. I don't want no trouble." Gus sighed. He wasn't sure if she meant she didn't want Jeremiah Mulligan to know, or she didn't want the sheriff involved. Either way, Gus recognized the trembling in her voice as genuine terror. For the time being, he decided to keep her hidden, at least until he could figure out more about this father of hers. As the day wore on, word spread quickly that a strange, driverless wagon had rolled into town. A few of the local gossips, like Mabel Carter, who ran the local diner, and Old Man Hennessy the barber, started poking around. Rumors sprouted that maybe bandits had killed the wagon's owner, or that it was a trick from rustlers. Everyone kept an eye on Gus's blacksmith shop, since the wagon was parked out front. Gus shot them stern looks to mind their own business, which was enough to keep the busier bodies at bay for the moment. In the late afternoon, Sarah perched on an old stool inside the shop, nibbling on a scrap of venison jerky. She watched Gus hammer out a horseshoe, fascinated by the dance of sparks. He tried to appear composed, but inside a swirl of questions kept him unsettled. Where was her father? Who was he really that made Sarah so terrified? Eventually, Gus closed up shop early. He asked Sarah if she wanted a proper meal. She nodded shyly, so he decided to walk her around the back alleys to the diner. Luckily, Mabel Carter was a discreet friend, so Gus quietly explained that Sarah was a niece from out of town, hungry and in need of rest. Mabel, a kindly but no-nonsense woman with salt and pepper hair, served up a generous plate of stew and fresh bread, eyeing Sarah sympathetically. Though Mabel asked no direct questions, her worried frown spoke volumes. As Sarah ate, Gus pondered what the next step should be. If he told the sheriff, Sarah might panic. But if he didn't, and her father suddenly reappeared? Gus wanted to keep the peace. Dry Gulch was a quiet place. The last thing anyone needed was a violent confrontation. Night fell with an unusual hush over Dry Gulch. In the blacksmith's modest upstairs room, Gus prepared a cot for Sarah. He gave her blankets and a spare pillow, ensuring she'd be safe for the evening. The stables behind his shop could hold the old mare from the wagon, and Gus penned it there for the night. Sarah was exhausted, dozing off as soon as she lay down. Gus tried to sleep in his own bed, but rest didn't come easy. The flicker of lantern light cast shadows on the wall, and his thoughts churned. He'd come west for a quiet life, far from conflict or heartbreak. Yet here he was, taking responsibility for a frightened child who had fallen into his care. Close to midnight, a muffled thump on the stairs jarred him awake. He lit his lantern and tiptoed to the door. Swinging it open, he found Sarah half awake, eyes wide in terror, pointing toward the window. "He's out there," she whispered, voice trembling. Gus followed her gaze. The dusty street below was dark. He saw no movement, no silhouette except for the tall hitching post, but Sarah seemed certain. Gus hurried down the stairs to the shop's front door. He peered outside. For a moment, he thought he saw a figure dart behind the wagon. Or perhaps it was a trick of the moonlight. He stepped out onto the porch, calling, "Who's there?" Silence, except for the distant whine of desert wind. Tense seconds passed. Then the street was still again. Sarah hovered near the doorway, hugging herself. "I know it was him," she said, teeth chattering. Even if it was her father, he was gone now. Gus locked up tight, urging Sarah to try to rest, but neither of them slept well after that. Morning came slowly, marked by a lurid pink sky. Gus and Sarah finished a hurried breakfast, just enough to keep them going. Gus decided to do something more active, head to Sheriff Hastings, and come clean. He told Sarah he was stepping out, that she should stay put in the shop. She nodded, though anxiety pinched her features. Gus walked down the dusty road to the sheriff's office, but just as he reached the wooden steps, he saw a tall, thin man with hollow cheeks standing on the other side of the street. The man wore a battered duster coat, dusty boots, and had a revolver strapped to his thigh. His eyes, sunken and restless, were trained directly on Gus. He said nothing, but Gus felt the hair on his neck stand on end. Sheriff Hastings appeared in the doorway. "Mornin', Gus. You hear about that stray wagon from yesterday?" Gus opened his mouth to speak, but the man across the street began walking toward them with long, purposeful strides. In the bright morning, Gus could see a wild glint in his eyes. He stopped before the sheriff and Gus. "You the lawman here?" he asked, voice crackling with suppressed tension. Hastings nodded. "I am. Sheriff Clyde Hastings. How can I help you?" The man looked from Hastings to Gus. Then, without preamble, he said, "My name is Jeremiah Mulligan, and I want to know who's been meddling with my wagon." Gus's blood ran cold. So this was Sarah's father. Hastings raised a brow. "That old wagon near the smithy. Heard it was empty yesterday. You saying it's yours?" Jeremiah's jaw tightened. He glanced at Gus. "It's mine. I left it there 'cause the mare was spent. Went off to handle some business. Now I come back, my wagon's been rummaged, and my daughter's missing." Hastings seemed genuinely surprised. "Daughter. We got no word of a missing girl." He cut his gaze toward Gus. Not quite suspicious, but definitely curious. "You know anything about a child, Gus?" Gus cleared his throat. No, he lied, trying to keep Sarah safe until he could figure out the situation. That wagon showed up with no driver. I haven't seen any child. He could feel Jeremiah's stare drilling into him, as if searching for cracks in Gus's story. The tension was suffocating. Well, Hastings said evenly, "If your daughter's truly missing, we can help search for her. Dry Gulch ain't big, but sometimes kids wander. Gus, you see anything?" Jeremiah cut him off. "I'll handle it myself. She's run off before. Girl's got a wild streak." His tone turned menacing. "But if I find out someone's keeping her from me, they'll be sorry." Hastings's voice went hard as steel. "Mr. Mulligan, you best keep a civil tongue. We don't allow threats around here." Jeremiah gave a mirthless grin. Then he turned on his heel and strode away, heading toward the dusty saloon on the far end of Main Street. Hastings watched him go, brow furrowed. Finally, the sheriff said, "Gus, something about that man ain't right. You tell me the truth if you know anything." Gus weighed his words. "I don't know much, Sheriff, but I'd be careful with that one." Hastings nodded grimly. "Keep your eyes open." Returning to the shop, Gus found Sarah pacing anxiously by the forge. Her face fell when she saw his expression, and he quickly told her what had happened. She paled, hugging herself. "He knows I'm here," she murmured. "Not necessarily," Gus said, though he wasn't entirely convinced. "But he suspects." She stared at the ground. He isn't the same father I grew up with," she said, voice trembling. "He's changed. After Mama died, something broke in him." Before Gus could respond, the front door burst open. Jeremiah Mulligan stood there, dust swirling behind him, the morning sun illuminating the fury in his eyes. He had come straight from the saloon, apparently losing what little patience he had. Sarah jumped and ducked behind Gus. Jeremiah noticed. A flicker of triumph or relief crossed his face, but his fury was more evident. "You!" he snarled at Gus. "You lied to me out there with the sheriff." Gus planted himself protectively between Jeremiah and Sarah. "Your daughter was in that wagon. She was alone and scared." Jeremiah advanced a step. "She's my kin. You got no right interfering. Now hand her over." Sarah gripped the back of Gus's shirt, trembling. Gus raised a hand. "Hold on. She told me you left her, that you've been treating her poorly." Jeremiah's voice turned cold. "That's none of your concern. She's my daughter. By law, she goes where I say." His hand hovered near his revolver. Gus's heart pounded. He had never aimed a gun at a man in his life. "Sarah's old enough to decide if she wants to go with you," he said, quietly, trying to keep the peace. Jeremiah's lip curled. "Don't test me, Blacksmith. I came west for business. My daughter tried to sabotage me. She's cunning." A flicker of confusion crossed Gus's mind. Sabotage? That hardly seemed to fit the timid girl behind him. But Jeremiah stepped closer, eyes locked on Sarah. "If you run again, you'll regret it." The threat was blatant. Gus found himself stepping forward. "You threaten her again, I'll have the sheriff on you. Now get out." Jeremiah snorted, scanning the shop for a moment, as if memorizing every corner. Finally, he turned on his heel. Before leaving, he tossed over his shoulder, "You got until sundown to hand her over. Then I'm coming back, and there won't be talk next time." The door slammed shut behind him. Sarah sank to her knees, tears streaking her dusty cheeks. Gus's hands shook with anger. He knew he had to do something. He couldn't just hand Sarah over to that man. But how to keep her safe? Half an hour later, Gus found himself sitting on the edge of a creaky chair in the local diner, Mabel Carter again by his side. He'd told her the situation in hurried whispers. "She's scared to death of him," Mabel Gus said, glancing at Sarah, who was leaning against the far wall, eyes darting around warily. "I can't let her go back, but the law says a father's got rights. And Jeremiah Mulligan is a dangerous man. If I keep her from him, that might lead to a standoff." Mabel pursed her lips in thought. "You sure about that?" "Jeremiah don't look too stable. Sheriff Hastings is the law, but he can't take sides so easily without proof of wrongdoing. Proof or no, I'm not giving that girl back to him," Gus said, determined. "But we need help. We need someone who's not afraid to face Mulligan if he tries something." Mabel sipped her coffee. "That gambler fella who breezed into town last week, he used to ride with Wyatt Earp's posse, or so he claims. Name's Silas Merrick. If half the stories are true, he's been in his share of trouble before. Might be able to handle a gunslinger type." Gus scowled. He didn't care for gamblers, especially tall tales. But if Silas Merrick really did have connections to men like Wyatt Earp, maybe he had some skill with a gun. "I'll talk to him," Gus said. They found Silas Merrick in the back of the saloon, bent over a rickety table with 2 local ranchers. Cards were splayed out, and a few gold coins glittered on the tabletop. Silas was in his early 30s with a cunning smile and a well-groomed moustache. At first glance, Gus thought he looked too refined for a rough frontier gambler, but the bulge of a pistol beneath Silas's vest was a reminder of reality. When Gus and Mabel approached, Silas excused himself from the card game. "You folks look as worried as a cat in a dog pound." "Something I can do for you." Gus explained the predicament in hushed tones. Silas listened occasionally, arching an eyebrow. When Gus finished, Silas leaned back, fiddling with the gold ring on his finger. "So you want me to stand up to a man who's threatened violence? Possibly risking my hide?" Gus nodded, uncertainty gnawing at him. "I can't pay you much." Silas waved that off. "I ain't got a good feeling about bullies. If he's truly as bad as you say, I'll make sure the law is on your side." He paused. "But we'll need to talk to the sheriff. I can't just ambush the man without giving the local law a chance to intervene." Though Silas's bravado made Gus uneasy, he didn't see another option. "I appreciate it," Gus said. Silas Merrick joined Gus, Sarah, and Mabel at the sheriff's office. Sheriff Hastings listened intently, stroking his grey beard. He eyed Sarah carefully. "Young lady, can you tell me if your father's ever harmed you physically?" Tears welled in Sarah's eyes. He hasn't done anything that left marks, but he screams at me, threatens me. He used to be gentle. Now, he's like a stranger. After Mama died, it's like he hates me." She trailed off, unable to speak further. Hastings looked uncomfortable. "Legally, it's tough. Without clear abuse or a court order, a father has rights to his child." He raised a placating hand. "But I'm not about to force her into a bad situation." Gus's face burned with frustration. "So what can we do?" "Mulligan's threatened me too. He said he'd come for her by sundown." A long silence stretched. Finally, Hastings said, "We can do a couple of things. One, I can deputize you, Gus, or you, Silas, to help me keep the peace if Mulligan tries anything. 2, we can see if Sarah has kin somewhere else, or if a judge in the next county might grant some protective measure. But that'll take time." Sarah shook her head. "Ain't got no other family I know of. Mama was an only child, and I never met my grandparents." Hastings sighed. "Then it comes down to me keeping Mulligan away if he tries anything violent. I'll need your help, though. Dry Gulch is a big place to cover alone. Silas cracked his knuckles. I'm in. Hell, I get bored easy. This might keep me sharp. Gus nodded, swallowing hard. Protecting Sarah was the priority. If that meant picking up a gun he rarely used, so be it. Sundown approached with agonizing slowness. Tension gripped the entire town. Word of the conflict spread, though folks didn't know the full details, only that Jeremiah Mulligan was on the warpath about his missing daughter. Some townspeople started locking their doors early, sensing trouble. Others, like a few rowdy ranch hands, hovered around the saloon, hoping to see fireworks. Gus kept Sarah hidden inside the blacksmith shop, away from curious eyes. Meanwhile, Silas Merrick positioned himself across the street, leaning against a post with a casual air, though he was anything but relaxed. Sheriff Hastings strolled up and down the main drag star, gleaming in the dimming light. Mulligan hadn't shown his face all afternoon. Part of Gus hoped he'd simply left town, that he'd gone off to chase whatever claim or fortune had driven him west. But come twilight, those hopes were dashed. Just as the sun dipped below the rooftops, Mulligan strode into view, heading directly for Gus's shop. Gus, standing on the porch, braced himself. He noticed the old wagon was still parked off to the side, the mare stabled by Gus's stall. Mulligan seemed to ignore it. His boots thumped on the wooden walk. He stopped a few feet from Gus, lip curled. Then he jerked his chin. "Where is she?" "She doesn't want to go with you," Gus said calmly. Mulligan's face twisted. "She's my daughter," he spat. Then, lowering his voice, he sneered. "You don't know what's at stake." Gus felt a flicker of confusion. What exactly is at stake here? Mulligan hesitated, as if weighing whether to say more. Finally, in a low hiss, he said, "I've got enemies, Blacksmith. Men in high places who want something of mine. My claim to a silver deposit rumored in the Southern Territory. Sarah knows about it. She's put me at risk by running off. If the wrong folks get hold of her, they'll force her to talk, and I lose everything. Understand?" Gus's gut churned. So Mulligan believed Sarah was some key to a mining claim. "She's a child. You're scaring her half to death." Mulligan's eyes flicked around, noticing Silas across the street and the sheriff's shape in the distance. He lowered his voice. "I'm done talking. You hand her over." Gus swallowed hard. Mulligan's gaze hardened. In one swift motion, he reached for his revolver. Gus heard the metal scrape of the gun clearing leather. Time seemed to slow. Gus froze. He was no gunfighter. But before Mulligan could lift the weapon, a shot rang out from across the street. The bullet kicked up dust near Mulligan's boot. Silas Merrick had fired a warning shot. Not so fast friend Silas drawled, leveling his revolver. Sheriff Hastings came running too, hand on his own piece. Mulligan's face was a mask of pure fury. Slowly he raised his hands. Hastings stepped forward. "Jeremiah Mulligan, you're under arrest for threatening violence. Drop your weapon." Mulligan paused before letting his revolver clatter to the ground. Hastings retrieved it, snapping handcuffs on Mulligan's wrists. "I'll hold you in the jail until we figure out what to do," Hastings said. He nodded to Gus. "Make sure the girl's all right." Gus exhaled, adrenaline roaring in his ears. For now, it seemed Sarah was safe. But a knot in Gus's stomach warned that the trouble wasn't over. Mulligan sat in the town's small jail cell, stony-faced. Hastings questioned him for an hour, trying to piece together Mulligan's story. Gus listened through the bars, arms folded. Mulligan was tight-lipped, revealing only hints he was after a silver claim near the border, rumored to be a vast deposit that could make a man rich beyond measure. Mulligan had found a partial map. Sarah apparently had seen it at some point. Mulligan suspected that men from Tucson or Phoenix wanted that map, and he was paranoid about her falling into their hands. Hastings shook his head. "That's all well and good, but you threatened to kill Gus. And your daughter." Mulligan glowered. "She betrayed me. She wants to run, probably sell the details to the highest bidder. She's not innocent." Gus clenched his jaw. "You're out of your mind. She's scared for her life." "Scared?" Mulligan sneered. "The girl's cunning. You'll see. She'll turn on you just as quickly." Sarah, who was in the next room with Mabel Carter, peeked around the corner. She flinched at Mulligan's gaze, retreating quickly. Gus felt a surge of protectiveness. Sheriff Hastings locked the cell and turned to Gus. "I'll keep him here overnight, maybe longer. Judge Bishop is due in the next town next week. We'll see about charging Mulligan with attempted assault." He lowered his voice. "But if he's telling the truth about enemies after that silver claim, we might have bigger trouble. Could be bounty hunters or guns for hire sniffing around." Gus sighed. The Wild West was rarely peaceful for long. "What do we do with Sarah in the meantime? She's welcome to stay with you if you're willing. I'll keep a guard on Mulligan, but you should keep watch." Gus agreed, though he felt nerves coil in his stomach. One crisis averted, but more could loom on the horizon. With Mulligan in jail, the town exhaled a collective breath, though curiosity and anxiety replaced fear. People whispered about the father who'd turned violent, the mysterious silver claim, and the frightened girl. Some folks gawked at Sarah as she walked with Gus, pity in their eyes. Others eyed her warily, as if Mulligan's talk of betrayal had seeded doubt. A rumor even circulated that Sarah was a runaway con artist. Such was the nature of gossip in small frontier towns. Sarah ignored most of it, keeping close to Gus. She helped with small tasks around the smithy, eager to keep her mind busy. Every clang of the anvil reminded her she was safe near Gus. He rarely spoke of the trouble, preferring to keep her calm. Meanwhile, Silas Merrick grew intrigued by Mulligan's mention of a silver claim. "I've heard rumors for years," he told Gus one afternoon in the saloon. "A hidden motherlode somewhere near the territory border. Some folks think it's myth. Others claim they have a piece of a map. Mulligan might not be bluffing." Gus shrugged. "And if he's not, so what?" Silas gave him an appraising look. "So you don't want to share in that fortune, man? You could leave blacksmithing behind, retire in California, maybe." Gus's expression hardened. "I didn't take Sarah in to get some piece of treasure. I just want her safe." Silas raised his hands in a gesture of peace. "Understood. Just be aware if Mulligan's story spreads, unscrupulous men might start turning their attention on your new houseguest." The thought unsettled Gus. He remembered Mulligan's ominous warning about enemies. While Mulligan rotted in jail, they might come sniffing for the map, assuming Sarah had it, or at least knew the details. Gus decided to talk to Sarah directly about it. Back in the forge, Gus found Sarah carefully polishing a horseshoe he'd finished. Despite her young age, she was meticulous, determined to help however she could. He set aside his hammer. "Sarah, can we talk?" She nodded, nervous. Gus guided her to a small bench in the corner. He glanced at the closed door, ensuring they were alone. "Your father believes you know details of a silver claim he's chasing?" Gus began gently. "He mentioned some map." Sarah's eyes widened slightly. She fiddled with her fingers. He's always been fixated on that map. Used to keep it in a locked box. I might have peeked at it once out of curiosity. I only saw fragments like a mountain shape and some creek. Then he caught me and he got real mad. Did you memorize it? Gus asked. She hesitated. Not exactly, but I got a good memory. I remember some details enough that he was furious I saw it. He started ranting that we had to keep moving so no one could guess where we were headed. Her voice trembled. He thought I might have told someone else along the way. Gus frowned. Have you told anyone? She shook her head vehemently. No. I wish I could forget it. None of it means anything to me. But he insisted I was a threat. He'd wake me up in the middle of the night, ask me questions about what I remembered. Tears threatened her eyes. He was obsessed. Gus took a deep breath. This was bigger than a simple family dispute. Mulligan's obsession and his paranoia had driven him to terrorize his own daughter. Now, with Mulligan in jail, that obsession might shift to others who wanted that map. Don't worry, Gus said softly. No one's going to force anything out of you. I promise. She blinked away tears. Thank you. You're the only one who's cared about me in a long time. Sheriff Hastings kept Mulligan locked up, but trouble arrived 3 days later in the form of 2 men riding into town at dawn. They wore dusty black coats, guns strapped to their hips. One was thick-set with a scar across his jaw, the other tall and rangy, sporting a wicked grin. They dismounted in front of the saloon, ignoring the stable boy's offer to tie up their horses. Rumors spread quickly. The men asked pointed questions around town. Where could they find Jeremiah Mulligan? Did he have family here? Some folks, oblivious to the details, casually pointed them to the jailhouse. Others warned them off. But by noon, the pair strode down Main Street and planted themselves outside the sheriff's office. Silas Merrick, ever watchful, spotted them and quietly signaled Gus. Gus grabbed his revolver, normally stowed away in a drawer, and tucked it into his belt heart, thumping. He told Sarah to hide in the shop, not to open the door for anyone. Outside, he found Silas leaning against a barrel near the jail cigarette, dangling from his lips. The 2 strangers glared at Silas, but he gave them a lazy smile. "Help you boys," he drawled. The one with the scar spat on the ground. "We want Mulligan." Sheriff Hastings emerged, arms folded over his star. "Mulligan's in my jail. State your business." The tall man sneered. "We heard tell he's got a lead on a silver claim. We're old partners of his, come to see if he wants to cut a deal." Hastings' brow lifted. "I bet." "Well, you can't see him right now. He's under arrest for attempted assault." "That," so the thick-set man rumbled. "Maybe we can bail him out." Hastings shook his head. "Judge Bishop hasn't arrived yet to set bail. Mulligan's not going anywhere." A tense moment stretched. The men sized up Hastings and Silas. Finally, the scarred one said, "We're staying in town then. Might be we have words for him when the judge arrives." They turned and walked off, dust trailing behind them. Silas flicked his cigarette away and exhaled. "Those gents reek of trouble." Hastings nodded. "They're not here to talk politely. You keep an eye out." Tension gripped the town. People eyed the 2 strangers warily. They drank heavily at the saloon, muttering to themselves occasionally, asking pointed questions about Sarah Mulligan. By the second night, it was clear they wanted the girl's knowledge of the map. Gus instructed Sarah to remain locked in the blacksmith shop, with Mabel Carter bringing her meals through the back door. On the 3rd evening, a confrontation erupted. One of the strangers, the thick-set one, with the scar, cornered Mabel as she left the blacksmith shop. Gus was in the shop's front room, reheating the forge. He heard a startled cry followed by a man's threatening growl. Racing outside, he found the man pinning Mabel against the wall, demanding, "Where's the girl?" Gus roared. "Let her go." He brandished his revolver, though his hands shook. The man sneered, about to draw, when Silas Merrick appeared on the street pistol already in hand. Shots fired in the air. The thick-set man recoiled, letting go of Mabel. Sheriff Hastings, alerted by the commotion, sprinted up, rifle at the ready. Townsfolk scattered, ducking behind barrels and into doorways. In moments, the situation was a Mexican standoff. Silas aiming at the scarred man, Hastings holding his rifle, while Gus hovered protectively over Mabel. The tall partner rushed onto the scene, gun drawn, joining his friend. A hush fell as the two men sized up the lawman and Silas. The tall one hissed, "Where's Mulligan's brat?" "We don't want trouble with the whole town." "Just her." Hastings spat. "You're not getting her. She's under my protection." The thick-set man's lips curled. "Your protection won't last forever. Once Mulligan's free, we'll get what we need." Hastings stared them down. "Holster your weapons or I'll arrest you both for assault." A tense heartbeat passed, then the men grudgingly complied. They slunk away, spitting curses under their breath. Hastings glared after them. "We need to find out exactly what Mulligan knows. If these men are so desperate to get that map, they'll cause real bloodshed soon." That night, Hastings decided to confront Mulligan directly in his cell. Gus and Silas accompanied him, though Sarah stayed hidden at the shop, watched over by Mabel. Mulligan glanced up with bloodshot eyes as they entered the small jailhouse. A single lantern lit the room, casting flickering shadows on the walls. Hastings approached the bars. "Those men you told us about, the ones after your map, they're here. They just tried to accost Mabel Carter. They want Sarah." Mulligan's lips thinned, but he looked unsurprised. "I warned you. You need to tell us everything," Hastings demanded. Voice cold. "If you want any chance of walking free, if you want your daughter to remain safe, start talking. They're not going to stop until they get that map, or kill her in the attempt." Mulligan stared at his hands, silent. Then softly, "I never wanted her hurt. She's all I got left of my wife." Gus's anger flared. "You threatened her yourself." Mulligan winced. My mind hasn't been right. After her mother died, it was easier to focus on the claim. I lost my senses." He looked up, tears reflecting the lantern light. "Those men are from the Peyton gang, led by a big ranch owner named Nicholas Peyton in the Southern Territory. They want the map to take the silver. They've threatened me before. That's why I ran to keep Sarah away from them. But my paranoia got the best of me. I thought Sarah betrayed me." Silas huffed. "Let's cut to the chase. Where's the map now?" "In the false bottom of that trunk in the wagon," Mulligan replied. "But I destroyed the crucial part of it. Sarah might remember a detail or two, but no one can find the deposit without the missing piece." He rubbed his face. "I need her to confirm the last landmark. That's what they want." Hastings exhaled. "Now we know." "But how do we protect Sarah?" Mulligan's gaze flicked to Gus. "Let me talk to her. Let me make it right. I swear if you get me out of this cell, I'll help you drive those men out and keep Sarah safe." Hastings's jaw tightened. "I can't just release you, but if you cooperate, maybe we can work something out." In the corner, Silas gave Gus a sidelong look, as if saying, "This is your call." Gus wrestled with his conscience. On one hand, Mulligan had threatened to kill him. On the other, Mulligan's paranoia might have been fueled by desperation to protect Sarah from the gang. Could he be trusted enough to help? Finally, Gus took a breath. "We'll think on it," he told Mulligan. Back at the blacksmith shop, they relayed the conversation to Sarah in hushed tones. She sat at the small table, hugging herself. "So, he didn't really hate me," she whispered. "He thought I sold him out." Gus placed a hand on her shoulder. "He was wrong to do what he did, Sarah. But it sounds like those men are the real danger." Sarah wiped her eyes. "What do we do now?" Silas spoke up. "Sheriff Hastings thinks a plan's in order. The judge arrives in a few days to hear Mulligan's case. We can't let the Peyton gang snatch Sarah before then. We need to get rid of those men, or at least stall them." Gus nodded. "We'll need a decoy or some ruse to draw them away from Sarah." Mabel leaned in, face thoughtful. "What if you make them believe Sarah left town? Maybe we can slip her out quietly in a wagon, head to the next county and hide her until the judge can rule." Sarah shivered. "They'll just follow me. I don't want more danger." Gus chewed his lip. "What about Mulligan? If we let him out to help, might he be able to call these men off or lead them astray?" Silas shrugged. "Possibly. But can we trust him not to run off with Sarah and the map?" A heavy silence. No solution seemed perfect. Finally, Gus stood. "We'll talk to Hastings in the morning. For now, let's stay vigilant." The night was quiet for a few hours. Sarah dozed on the cot upstairs. Gus nodded in a chair revolver on his lap. Around midnight, footsteps creaked on the porch. Gus jerked awake, heart hammering. He heard a polite knock. Gus blew out the lamp, carefully stepping to the door. "Who is it?" A muffled voice came from the other side. "It's Silas. Open up." Gus peeked through a crack in the boards, saw Silas's familiar form. He unlatched the door. But the moment it opened, Silas stumbled inside, collapsing to his knees. Blood trickled down his left arm. "Silas," Gus exclaimed quietly, locking the door. He helped the gambler to a chair. "What happened?" Silas grimaced, pressing a hand to the wound. "Ran into those two snakes near the saloon. They were lying in wait, shot at me when I wouldn't back down. I got away, but not before a bullet grazed me." Gus hurried to fetch a rag and whiskey to clean the wound. Sarah, awakened by the commotion, peered down from the stairs. She gasped when she saw the blood. Mabel, who was sleeping in a small back room, also rushed out, eyes wide. As Gus tended the wound, Silas hissed, "They're planning something big. They said tomorrow night they'll torch the blacksmiths if we don't hand over Sarah." He winced as Gus dabbed at the bullet graze. "We gotta act now." Fear coiled in Gus's chest. "They mean business." Silas nodded. "We can't wait for the judge. We either have to fight or get Sarah out of here." Sarah, trembling, stepped forward. "I don't want you to get hurt. Maybe it's best if I run away alone." Gus reached out, gently taking her arm. "No. We stick together. Mulligan might be our best bet. We let him talk these men down or lead them astray." Silas grunted in pain. "Then let's do it. First light, we see Hastings and free Mulligan on the condition he helps." Dawn broke in a wash of pale light. Silas's wound was patched up enough for him to move around, though he favored the arm. Sheriff Hastings was reluctant, but after hearing Silas's story, he opened Mulligan's cell. Under close watch, Mulligan stepped out, rubbing his wrists, relief and trepidation mingling on his features. "We let you out, but you're not free," Hastings said firmly. "You help us get rid of these men. After that, we see about your charges." Mulligan nodded stiffly, his eyes flicking from Hastings to Gus. "I'll do what's right," he said. Then his gaze fell on Sarah, who hovered behind Gus, uncertainty in her posture. An awkward pause stretched. Mulligan took a tentative step toward his daughter. "Sarah," he said quietly, "I'm sorry." She frowned, arms folded protectively. "You treated me like an enemy." Mulligan's eyes shimmered with guilt. "I was wrong. I thought if you knew the map's secrets, you'd be in danger. I couldn't lose you like I lost your mother." But my fear twisted into anger. "I took it out on you. It was never about hating you, child." He swallowed. "I know you can't forgive me easy." She looked at him for a long moment, tears brimming. Then she nodded slowly. "Don't ever threaten me again." Mulligan bowed his head. "I won't." Gus and Silas exchanged glances. It was a fragile reunion, but a start. The father-daughter pair might not have a perfect resolution, but at least Mulligan seemed genuine in his remorse. The plan was hastily formed. If the Peyton gang men wanted Sarah Mulligan, would lead them on a wild goose chase, pretending to reveal the location of the silver deposit away from Dry Gulch. Meanwhile, Sarah would be hidden at the blacksmith shop under the protection of Gus Silas and the sheriff. Mulligan insisted he meet them outside of town that evening, near a rocky bluff where he'd claimed to have stashed the missing part of the map. Hastings and a couple of volunteer deputies would hide nearby, ready to capture the men once they were drawn away from Sarah. Sarah was uneasy. "He's risking his life." Mulligan managed a grim smile. "I'll survive. Those scoundrels only want that map. If they think I've got it, they'll come for me, leaving you alone. Then the sheriff can arrest them." All day, Mulligan prepared, sharpening his survival knife, checking the revolver Hastings loaned him. He spent some time quietly talking with Sarah, though neither looked entirely comfortable. Gus tried to reassure her. He's doing the right thing now. As dusk fell, Mulligan left town heading for the bluff. Hastings and two deputies' men, named Frank Barnes and Levi Garrison, followed at a discreet distance. Silas, still nursing his wound, decided to stay in town in case the men tried a double bluff. Gus locked the blacksmith shop, shutters closed, forging a strong barrier around Sarah. They waited in tense silence. Hours crept by like molasses. Night deepened. The moon rose, bathing Dry Gulch in pale light. Sarah dozed on a chair near the forge. Gus paced, ears straining for any sign of trouble. Silas stood outside, leaning against the wall, occasionally peering down the main street. Shortly after midnight, distant gunshots cracked the stillness, far off but unmistakable. Sarah bolted upright. Gus exchanged a worried look with Silas. "That must be Hastings and Mulligan," Gus muttered. Sarah's face paled. "What if—" Gus tried to calm her. "Hastings can handle himself. Mulligan's no slouch either. We have to trust them." But the minutes ticked on with more sporadic shots echoing across the desert. Then silence. A heavy, agonizing silence. Finally, the sound of galloping hooves approached. Gus stepped outside, gun at the ready. Through the moonlit haze, he saw two horses. One rider was the deputy Levi Garrison, helping a wounded Mulligan cling to the saddle. Mulligan slumped, clutching his side. Deputy Barnes was nowhere in sight. Levi pulled up in front of the blacksmith shop. "We got him." Mostly, he gasped. Those men ambushed us. We shot one dead. The other is wounded, cuffed to a tree. Sheriff Hastings is dealing with him. But Mulligan took a bullet. Gus and Silas helped Mulligan down. Sarah rushed outside, tears springing to her eyes at the sight of her father's blood-stained side. It's just a graze, Mulligan managed, voice strained. Hurts like the devil, though. They brought Mulligan inside the shop, laying him on a table. Mabel Carter, who had basic medical knowledge from her years traveling with wagon trains, cleaned the wound and bandaged him. The bullet had passed through flesh, leaving a painful but non-fatal injury. Sarah hovered at her father's side, holding his hand gently. Sheriff Hastings arrived an hour later, dragging the tall partner in chains. The scarred one was dead from the shootout. The tall man glowered, but with a bullet in his leg, he was in no shape to fight. Hastings tossed him in jail, and the doctor came to treat him under guard. With the threat subdued, the town began to breathe easier. Mulligan faced possible charges of assault on Gus, but Gus chose not to press them. He's done enough to redeem himself, Gus told the sheriff. If Sarah forgives him, so do I. Judge Bishop. When he finally arrived, took statements from everyone. Mulligan was reprimanded and fined for his earlier threats, but given the extenuating circumstances, his genuine remorse, plus the role he played in stopping the Peyton gang, the judge was lenient. Mulligan was free to leave Dry Gulch, though under a warning never to repeat his crimes. With Mulligan recovering, Sarah faced a choice. She was still a child, but the law gave custody to Mulligan unless proven unfit. He insisted he'd changed, that he'd do right by her. She listened, but was understandably wary. Gus, concerned for her well-being, hesitantly offered, "You could stay here in Dry Gulch if you want, Sarah. I'd see to it that you had a proper roof, schooling, whatever you need." Mulligan bandaged around his ribs, looked at Gus with gratitude, but also a touch of sadness. "I want my daughter with me, but I won't force her if she hates me." Sarah bit her lip, eyes clouded with indecision. "Papa, are you sure you're done chasing that silver?" Mulligan nodded. "I found nothing but misery. I'll tear up that map if it means keeping you safe." She searched his face, seeing a sincerity that had long been absent. Slowly she reached out, pressing his hand. I'd like to try again. But if you ever go back to how you were, I'll leave and never come back." Mulligan squeezed her hand, tears brimming. "I swear I'll do right by you." Gus sighed, a gentle smile touching his lips. "I just want you safe, Sarah. If that's what you both want, I'll wish you well. But you always got a place here if you need it." Over the next week, Mulligan healed. Gossip died down, replaced by respect for how Gus and Hastings had safeguarded Sarah. The father and daughter prepared to leave Dry Gulch, planning to head east away from the territory that had brought them so much grief. Mulligan said he would find honest work in a larger town, maybe a ranch where they could start anew. Sarah spent her last days in Dry Gulch, soaking up the quiet kindness she'd found helping Gus around the forge, sharing meals with Mabel Carter, who fussed over her like a mother hen. She even teased Silas about his fancy card tricks, bringing a playful smile to the gambler's face. As the day of departure arrived, Gus hitched up the old wagon, which was now repaired with fresh wheels and reinforced boards. Mulligan, moving gingerly with his healing wound, thanked Gus for everything. "You saved her life, and maybe mine." Gus shook his hand. "I just did what was right. Keep her safe." Sarah hugged Gus, tears in her eyes. "Thank you, Gus. You're the best friend I've ever had. Maybe I'll come visit someday. He nodded, throat tight. "I'll be here forging metal. Always a bed and a warm meal for you." Mulligan clicked his tongue, and the horse trotted forward, carrying father and daughter out of Dry Gulch. Townspeople waved them off, some politely, some genuinely fond. Then in a swirl of dust, they were gone. The next morning, Gus woke early. He felt an odd quiet in his heart, missing the presence of Sarah's shy smile. But life returned to a steady rhythm, stoking the forge, hammering horseshoes, greeting neighbors. Sheriff Hastings came by, tipping his hat in thanks for all Gus had done. Silas was packing his saddlebags, ready to move on to the next adventure, but not before patting Gus on the shoulder. "You're a good man, Clancy. Stay that way." Weeks passed, and the story of the blacksmith who sheltered a frightened girl spread beyond Dry Gulch. Some travelers spoke of Mulligan turning over a new leaf. Others whispered about the silver claim. But for Gus, the real treasure was the knowledge that he'd done the right thing. He'd taken in a vulnerable child and faced down danger to protect her. That was worth more than any silver in the world. And so in the dusty pages of frontier lore, the tale of Gus Clancy and Sarah Mulligan would be remembered not for gold or gunfights alone, but for courage, compassion, and the chance of redemption that can bloom even in the harshest desert soil. And that, folks, is how a humble blacksmith found a frightened girl in an abandoned wagon, and then faced down her father, a haunted man, whose obsession threatened to consume them all. In a single stroke of fate, Gus Clancy uncovered a family torn by grief. A hidden treasure that lured dangerous men and a young girl yearning for safety. Yet through grit, heart, and good people like Sheriff Hastings and Silas Merrick, Dry Gulch stood firm against the storm. The bonds forged there proved stronger than the draw of silver, reminding us that compassion can triumph over greed, and redemption can dawn where we least expect it. If you enjoyed this Wild West drama, be sure to hit that like button to show your support. Share this tale with friends who love frontier adventures, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. There's always another story waiting to be told. Until next time, ride safe.